In this tutorial, we're going to add a reference line for our takt time, which we're going to calculate with parameters that can be controlled and adjusted that'll change our available time and customer demand to recalculate and move our takt line accordingly. For our takt time calculation, we're going to use as our customer demand the required output for one day. This is an assemble to order environment where customer orders that come in today all need to be assembled and shipped the following day. Our available time, we're going to use our scheduled working time. Currently, we're running one shift or 7.5 hours of working time. And our primary downtime is attributed to setup, namely the setup of different materials for each different part number, each different work order. So we're going to calculate that as the number of work orders multiplied by the setup time per work order. In order to set up our dashboard so that users can adjust each of these variables to recalculate our takt time, we need to set each of these variables up in Tableau as a parameter. The way to do this in Tableau is go to our data pane and in this drop-down select Create Parameter. The first parameter we'll set up is our scheduled working time in hours. We'll leave this as a float to allow decimal values like 7.5 hours, which will make our default. And for now, we'll leave allowable values selected as all. Next, let's create a parameter for our customer demand, which is our one-day required output. We're going to go ahead and change this to an integer in units, and we'll set the default value to 400, our average daily demand. Now we need the parameters to subtract from our scheduled working time to get our available time, which we said was going to be our setup downtime, starting with our number of work orders. We'll set this as an integer value, and it averages 20 different part numbers or 20 different work orders per day. And we're going to multiply that by our setup time per work order, which we're going to leave that as an integer. It defaults to about 7 minutes, and we're going to give that a pretty healthy range later. Okay, so we have all of our parameters set to calculate our takt time. Now, to calculate our takt, we're going to go into our data pane, click the drop down to create a calculated field, and we'll call this takt. And in our numerator, remember it's our available time, which is our scheduled working time. We need to multiply this times 3,600 to convert it from hours to seconds. And we're going to subtract our setup time, total setup time, which was our number of work orders multiplied by our setup time per work order, and we need to multiply that by 60 in order to get that from minutes into seconds. Now we simply need to divide this by our customer demand, which we said is our one day required output. Okay, that looks good. Our calculation is valid, and that's our calculation for our takt time. Just for kicks, we'll come over to our data source and we'll see our takt correctly calculated here in our data source. Now let's bring our takt line into the view. We'll start with our operator loading chart. So let's start by bringing our newly calculated takt field into the view by dragging it to detail. Let's change it from sum to an attribute. Now we're going to go from our data to our analytics pane here and drag reference line into the view. When we do that, this dialog box is going to open, and let's change our value to our attribute takt and change to total. We'll click OK and take a quick look at it and see that it's correctly brought in our takt timeline into the view. I'd like to clean up our label and our tooltip a bit, so I'm going to right click on the line and go to edit, and under label, let's change this to custom, and the field name is takt. I like that. I'm going to say takt equals, and then we're going to simply bring in the value as it recalculates and put our abbreviation for seconds at the end of it. I'm going to copy that and do the same for our tooltip. Now we've got a clean label and tooltip. Let's do one more thing. I'd like to take the decimal place down a little bit. And so let's change our number format to 1 decimal place. There, that looks pretty nice. Now let's repeat these same steps and bring the takt line into our Yamazumi chart. So again, we'll close this. We need to go back to our data. Let's bring takt into our view first. Let's change it from sum to attribute. Now back to the analytics pane. Let's bring reference line into our view. On the dialog box, let's change it to takt. Let's change it to total. Let's go ahead and fix our labels, field name, takt, equals, and we'll just go ahead and type it in here, seconds. Now I'm going to copy this. We'll do the same here in our tooltip, paste this, OK, and let's go ahead and clean up our decimal, bring it to 1 decimal place, and voila, we've now brought our takt line into both our operator loading and Yamazumi charts. So we've built our single stack Yamazumi chart and our operator loading chart, and we've added a reference line with for our takt time on both of the charts. And our takt time is calculated based on parameters which calculate our available time and a parameter for our customer demand. Now we want to set controls for our parameters to make them easy to adjust. So let's start with our available time. And if we click on the drop down here, we can go to show parameter, and you'll see it show over here. Let's change our schedule working time from our default to say 10 hours. And notice how our takt line moves. To make this parameter adjustable with a slider, we first need to go in to edit the parameter and define a range. Let's say we could work a minimum of 4 hours and a maximum, if we added a second shift, of 16 hours. And let's do a step size of 0.5 so that we can adjust this for every half hour. Now, if I come back, I can now change this to a slider, and now I can adjust my parameter using the slider, and you'll notice that the takt line will recalculate and move. Let's do the same thing for the number of work orders. We start by showing the parameter. Then let's come over here, drop down, edit the parameter, and let's give this a range. We could have a minimum of 10 work orders or a maximum of 30 work orders in a given day. And let's change this also to a slider. And once again, use that to adjust our takt line. Continuing on, let's add our setup time per work order. We'll show the parameter over here. Let's give this a range from 0. We'd love it if our setups, we could keep our line running and set up in cycle, and this could take as long as 30 minutes. Let's change this also to a slider. And once again, see our takt line recalculate. And finally, let's bring in our required output, our customer demand, our denominator. Let's give this a range of, we could see as few as 200 units needing to be produced and as many as 600. Let's change this to a slider. And once again, we'll see this adjust and see our takt line recalculate. And of course, our takt line is also recalculating on our operator loading chart. And with that, we have everything we need to begin building our dashboard.